So we start with monopoly. It's the opposite of perfect competition. There's one seller, not a lot. They're the same in that we assume that it's a unique product and there's no close substitute. Otherwise, it loses monopoly power. There's blockaded entry and exit. It's hard for people to get into this market for whatever reason. Now, oops. The reasons might be technical. They just have some kind of knowledge that nobody else has. Maybe a declining cost technology that would make them a natural monopoly. We'll talk about that later. Legal barriers, maybe a patent or a copyright, or some kind of exclusive franchise. Maybe the government gives them the monopoly power like it does to many utilities. Or they can basically just lobby for legal protection. And finally, there's imperfect dissemination of information. Cost, price, and product quality information are withheld from uninformed buyers and potential entrants, potential competition. Okay. So this is what a monopoly looks like. We have, since they're the only firm in the industry, they face the market demand curve, which will be downward sloping. They're a profit maximizer by assumption, so they're going to choose a point where marginal revenue and equals marginal cost. Now remember, since we have a downward sloping demand curve, our marginal revenue curve is going to be below the demand curve and also downward sloping. For a linear demand curve, it's actually going to be 1/2 of demand. In other words, where it hits the where price is zero, right, and for marginal revenue is zero, it's going to be half the distance to the demand curve for a linear. But that's just something, a special case for a linear demand curve. So they choose a quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal price, and they let the demand curve determine the price. So at quantity Q, the price would be P here. My NDAs, I warned them, and they haven't done it in a long time, but before I was warning them, they would go up to this point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and they'd say that's the price. That's not the price. Right? If that was the price, it'd actually be, well, it could be losing money, but it wouldn't be profit maximizing. It'd have to come up to the demand curve, and that's where price is determined by demand. Okay. Now, we've done this exercise before. The markup over marginal cost, right, is equal to 1 minus the elasticity of demand. So how much above marginal cost the price is depends on how elastic the demand curve is. Right? The more inelastic, the higher the price can be above marginal cost, or higher the market can be. So in the following example, I assume I have a market demand, Q equals 2,000 minus 20. I solve for P to get the inverse demand, P equals 100 minus Q divided by 20, or 0.05. So total cost by assumption, and I'm just pointing this out here, equals 0.05 Q squared plus 1,000. Total revenue is, of course, just our inverse demand curve times Q. times Q, so P times Q equals 100Q minus Q squared divided by 20. I take the derivative of total revenue and I get
The
marginal revenue, perfect. That's 100 minus Q divided by 10, or 2Q divided by 20. And marginal cost is just the derivative of total cost, which is 2 times 0.05 Q, or 0.1 Q. Okay. As a profit maximizing firm, this monopolist will set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Right, I set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, and I get a Q of $500. Right. Should I do that? We go to the alphabet, or you guys good? Is that like this or this? I'm not trying to figure it out. Okay. All right, so this is real easy, actually. Right. 100 minus Q divided by 10, Q divided by 10, right? Negative Q divided by 10 is, so I have 100 is equal to 0.1 Q plus, minus sign here, 0.1 Q, or 100 equals 0.2 Q, or 100 over 0.2 equals Q equals 500. Then all I have to do is plug 500 into my inverse demand curve. So I get 500 divided by 20. 100 minus 500 divided by 20.
75.
75. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we had. Q is equal to 500. P equal to 75. I plug in 500 into my total cost function to get total costs. And of course I can do it for average cost too. So the profit, right, is just going to be total revenue, P times Q, minus total cost. In this case, I can write total cost as average cost times Q. So P minus average cost times Q, that's total revenue minus total cost. 75 minus 45 times 500 gives me a profit of 15,000. Our markup over marginal costs, right? It's 25, and divide that by P, it's 2/3. I'm sorry, 1/3. 25 over 75. Right. My elasticity, in this case, I know price, I know quantity. Where do I get the negative 20 from? I'm sorry?
And repeat that.
Where do I get that negative 20 from in the elasticity formula that I just had? Dependiente, perfect. In other words, right, the slope or the change in Q with respect to P is negative 20 for him. So that's here. So that's the change in Q or change in P, negative 20, times P, which we know is 75, divided by Q, which we know is 500, gives us an elasticity of negative 3. And like I said a while ago, P minus marginal cost divided by P gives us 1/3. Right? Solving for P in this equation gives us P is equal to 3/2 marginal cost. So 3/2 is 1.5. So basically the markup here is 50% over marginal cost, 1.5. So the question I have here for you guys is, how could output be affected by an increase in fixed costs?
No afecta,
¿Por qué?
porque le estaría añadiendo al costo y entonces la derivada, para buscar marginal, pues la derivada eso va a ser cero
Exactly.
y no va a
Right?
afectar.
It's not gonna affect your profit maximizing point, it's not gonna affect you because it's fixed costs. And we're setting marginal costs equal to marginal revenue at the profit maximizing point. How would it be affected if we had a variable cost increase?
Y aumenta, disminuye la cantidad,
La cantidad de
maximizar la ganancia.
ganancia.
Sí.
Or the maximum profit. Okay. Okay. So now, right, I want to compare I want to compare monopoly with perfect competition, right? Under perfect competition, we saw that the marginal cost curve in the industry, the supply curve in the industry was simply the summation of all the marginal cost curves. So if I had the summation of all the marginal cost curves, right, I have the market demand curve and marginal revenue. Right? This would be the equilibrium. And we have the competition price and the perfect competition quantity. Right? But for a monopoly, they're going to set the quantity where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, which is here. And then they're going to allow the demand curve to determine price, QM. So you can see under monopoly, we have less quantity being sold at a higher price than under perfect competition. That is assuming that the summation of all these little small firms equals the marginal cost of the big firm, which isn't necessarily so, but for our purposes, it's the easiest way to analyze this. So in this case, right, what do we have? And let me draw it over here, and I'll come back to this. Under perfect competition, I have my summation of all the marginal cost curves equaling supply. I have my demand curve. I have this area under the demand curve, but above price is equal to, remember what we call that?
Customer surplus.
Perfect. Consumer surplus, how about this area down here?
Producers.
Producer surplus, good. So we have basically three areas here. In this case, if they're linear, we have two triangles and a rectangle that are different than before under competition. What we have is this area here, this rectangle, which under perfect competition, right, would be consumer surplus. Now under monopoly, that's transferred to the producer. Now it's producer surplus. We also have these two triangles here. This used to be producer surplus. Now it's gone. This upper triangle used to be consumer surplus. Again, gone. That we consider a welfare loss, right? And the terminology that we use for these two triangles is called deadweight loss. So under monopoly, you have a transfer from consumer surplus to producer surplus, and you have deadweight loss. So there's a loss in welfare from a monopoly compared to perfect competition. Okay. So that triangle, I drew a flat marginal cost curve here to see it. This triangle right here is deadweight loss, and this rectangle here is that transfer from consumer surplus to producer surplus. Okay. Questions? Now, traditionally we think of monopolies simply restricting quantity, right, and maximizing profit that way. But there's other ways for monopolies to maximize profits. One, which is simplistic, a simplistic example your book uses, is instead of reducing quantity, they actually reduce quality and lower the costs. So it can be exercised to other dimensions other than quantity. So here, I'm going to have price as a function of quantity and quality. P times Q, and then cost, the same thing, is a function of quantity and quality, where X is quantity. I'm going to assume that since it's downward sloping, the partial of P with respect to Q is negative, but the partial of P with respect to X is positive. In other words, the better the quality, the more you can charge.
Entiendo.
¿Eh?
¿Cómo se mide la calidad de un producto?
That's a good question. In practice, in theory, we don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
And I guess for some products you can measure quality, but not every. So here, right? If I take my profit function and take the or the partial with respect to Q, I get P, right, plus Q, partial of P with respect to Q. Now, why do I have these two parts? Because we assumed that P was a function of Q, right? It was a function of Q and X. So I have two pieces. I have, right, by the product rule, I have P times Q. This P is a function. P times Q, right? So basically, when I take the partial of this, total revenue. In this case, I'm just the partial of total revenue with respect to quantity, right? Is just P. But I have Q, which affects P, so it would be plus Q times the partial of P with respect to Q. Again, by the product. So this is the first part of that, which is total revenue, of course. I subtract off the marginal cost with respect to quantity. Where C of Q is a partial of C with respect to Q. Now, if I change quality, X, I get Q, right, times the partial of P with respect to X, right? Of course, Q is not a function of X, it's just Q, but P is, minus the marginal cost with respect to X. Right, so basically now I have two first order conditions. That states a decrease in revenue from a quality decrease must equal the lower marginal cost of the quality increase, of a quality increase, I should say. So compared to perfect competition, I can have the same quantity, but lower my quality and still have a monopolist profit. Okay. Questions? All right. We're going to move on to price discrimination. Now, you can only have price discrimination if you have market power. So that's why we use it with monopoly. But price discrimination simply means that I can charge a different price to different consumers. Now, first degree price discrimination is a consumer surplus. First degree price discrimination says that I can charge this price right here to that first consumer who's going to pay that price, and then go ahead and charge just a little lower price to the next consumer, and so on. So basically, this part is a consumer surplus for that first consumer, And if I can first degree price discriminate, I can take away all
All
his
the-
consumer surplus.
Yeah.
So I basically transfer with first degree price discriminate all the consumer surplus to the producer, right? And all that consumer surplus is added to the person's profit, or I'm sorry, the firm's profit. So if you could actually first degree price discriminate, if you could do that, then basically you'd be maximizing profit even more so than a regular monopoly where they charge just one price. I'm sorry?
Sí, sí, marca monopolio.
And the good thing is that in this case, there's no welfare loss. There's a transfer from consumers to producers, but there's no deadweight loss because I'm still charging the last consumer the perfectly competitive price. That's first degree price discrimination. How we sell to each at the max price. That means the last buyer will buy exactly where marginal cost equals price. And that's how much Q we will sell, just like perfect competition. It's just a transfer, right? And never mind. Integrals are bad. We're not going to mess with them. Okay. Now that was first degree price discrimination. The next example I want to give is known as third degree price discrimination. What this means is, and it's probably one of the most common forms of price discrimination. Instead of charging different prices to each individual consumer, I charge different prices to different groups. For instance, students in general have a more elastic demand curve, maybe seniors do. And in that case, I can charge a different price to different groups if I can identify them. For instance, students have student IDs. Seniors, of course, have an ID with their age on it. And the truth is, if you go to the movies and try to get a senior discount, I still haven't, but I had a friend who did. Well, he's my age, but he's totally gray, so I guess he looks older. Not that I look young, I'm just saying that. but they usually don't question, right? They don't ask for IDs at movie theaters. They don't care if you're saving $1 or $2, whatever it is. Anyway, so basically, if I want to subjugate the market into two different groups, right? I want a price according to elasticity. I'm going to give that group, right, with the more elastic demand curve, a lower price, and that other group with the more inelastic demand curve, a higher price, right? We know that profit maximizing point was P equal to 1 plus 1 over the elasticity of demand equal to marginal cost, right? Is a profit maximizing point, right? Given the elasticity of demand. So if I have two groups, I can do that for each group. In practice, I'll have, these guys will have one marginal revenue, and these guys will have another marginal revenue. And I set each one equal to the marginal cost, and I let their demand curve determine the price for each group. Right? So the ratio of prices, however, right, P over Pj is going to equal the ratio of 1 plus 1 over the elasticity of demand for group J divided by 1 plus 1 over the elasticity of demand for group I. Right, so the ratio of prices is going to depend on the relative elasticities of the two groups. The more elastic group, or the group with more elastic demand, gets lower price. The group with,
con el signo negativo, ¿verdad?
perdón, los dos van a ser negativos. Yeah. Sometimes, depending on textbook, they'll have a minus sign here, and then the absolute value here. Most textbooks like to put elasticity and absolute value because it's less confusing, right? Because a bigger number, right, it means it's going to be more elastic. But if you have a negative number, a bigger negative number means it's so it goes down and it gets confusing for students. So that's why in most cases, they do the absolute value. for undergraduate textbooks. Okay. So here it is, and this guy is supposed to be up here. So this one with the more elastic demand and one with more inelastic demand, PJ greater than PI. And I mean, my graphs kind of suck here because I fix them and PowerPoint screws them up again. I've kind of given up, but someday maybe I'll figure out a way to do it. Okay. So here's an example. I have two groups. And I'm going to start with pretending I'm just a monopoly. I'm going to charge one price for both groups. I'm going to treat it as a single market, right? So basically, my quantity is going to be Q1 plus Q2, right? Or 48 minus 3P. That's the quantity for all the markets for both groups. So the inverse demand is going to equal 16 minus 1/3 Q. And of course, I multiply by Q, take the derivative and get marginal revenue. Right? Equals 16 minus 2/3 Q. And I'm going to assume that marginal cost is fixed at 6. And if marginal cost is fixed, so it equals the average cost. Right? So I set marginal cost equal to marginal revenues. That 16 minus 2/3 Q is equal to 6. And I get a quantity of 15. I plug that into my, excuse me, with my inverse demand curve, and I get a price of 11. And of course, I can plug 15 into my total revenue. And of course, my average cost times Q, 6 times 15 for my total cost, and I get a profit of 75 as a single price monopolist. I take these two groups and I don't separate them, I charge just the monopoly price. Okay. If I third degree price discriminate between these two, in other words, I charge a different price to each group according to their elasticity of demand, right? I do the same thing. I take each group's inverse demand curve, multiply it by Q to get total revenue. I take the derivative to get marginal revenue. And I set it equal to marginal cost, which we assume is 6. And I do the same thing for group 2. And for group 1, I get a quantity of 9 and a price of 15. For group 2, I get a quantity of 6 and a price of 9. So which of these two groups has more elastic demand?
¿Cuál es más elástico?
Sí.
Más elástico. El 2, ¿no? Sí. El 3 es el 9. Yo creo que el más inelástico es el 2.
Okay. Maybe if we look at back at the two demand curves.
No, el 1 no.
Yeah, but we can, I mean, you can look at the demand curves or you can just look at the price. Oops, I went the wrong way. Right? That group that gets charged a higher price is going to have the more inelastic demand. So group 1 is more inelastic and group 2 is more elastic. Right? So total profits is total revenue of group 1 plus total revenue from group 2 minus the total cost. Right? Where Q1 plus Q2 is 15, right? 9 plus 6. So the first one, right, is gonna 9 times 15, right? That's total revenue. 9 times 6 minus 6 times 15, that equals 99. So this, excuse me, this firm, if they're able to third degree price discriminate, increases their profits by $24, almost 25%. Okay, so if I'm a single price monopolist, right, the deadweight loss is going to be those two triangles, right? And I do this just like we did before. You take the P1 minus marginal cost, right? So 0.5 P1 minus cost times Q minus PC minus Q1. So in other words, right, in this case, this would be QPC, this would be Q1, so it'd be that area. P1, right? P1 is the monopoly price minus marginal cost, right? So I get that triangle. In this case, it would be the two triangles together, and multiply that by 0.5. So I get the area of the triangle. My deadweight loss is 40.5. I could have done this too, taking the integrals of the demand curves.
Third degree, no?
I'm sorry?
Is
Is it? Well, this is just a single price monopolist. Now, that's for the single price monopolist. What if I separate out the two groups? I'm still charging the monopoly price to the two groups separately, right? And I increase my profit. The deadweight loss, oh, I'm sorry, I lied. This is market one. This is market two. Under PC, that's a single price of 6. So I get 0.5 P2, which is monopoly price, minus MC times the perfect competition quantity minus the monopoly quantity, right, gives me a deadweight loss of 9. So I have 40.5 plus 9, and a total deadweight loss for the two markets of 49.5.
That's the third degree.
I'm sorry?
The third degree.
The third degree, you're right. And I'm sorry. If I remember right, the next slide. Yeah, okay. This is what I was thinking before, and got to be more careful. With the single price monopolist, right? The deadweight loss, if you remember, the price was 11. The quantity under perfect competition is 30, and the quantity under perfect competition is 30. The quantity under monopoly is 15, and I get a deadweight loss of 37.5. So the deadweight loss, right, for the third degree price discrimination gives us more deadweight loss, but it also gives the monopolist more profit. So if you're the monopolist, it's good. If you're society or a consumer, it's bad. Okay, we have first degree price discrimination and we have third degree price discrimination. So that means that we definitely are going to have something in between the two, second degree price discrimination. Now, my MBA book has a different classification for second degree and third degree than your book does. For instance, these quantity discounts, that second degree price discrimination, they also consider peak pricing, peak time pricing as second degree price discrimination. For instance, a toll road or a utility, they don't do it in Puerto Rico, but they do it back on the East Coast in the States, where, for instance, an electric company will charge you a higher price, right, during the evening hours than they will if you decide to do your laundry at 4 a.m. But if you do it, right at peak at 8 p.m., they charge you a higher rate. For toll roads, they charge you a higher rate during rush hour than they would at off-peak times. That would be an example of second degree price discrimination. Minimum purchase requirements, in other words, I have to buy it, or tie-in sales, or cover charges. For instance, the cover charge for my MBA book would consider third degree price discrimination. For us, it's second degree. So we'll just leave it at that. It really doesn't matter if you call it first degree or second degree, as long on third degree or second degree, as long as you know the concepts. Okay. So basically, in these cases, I want to make the customer separated separate themselves according to willingness to pay. So, for instance, a two-part tariff, and that's like a cover charge, a membership fee. For instance, Costco, I have to pay a fee, and then when I go there, and I have to pay for each individual item. Country clubs, basically you join a fee, you pay a fee, you pay a membership fee, and then if you want to play a round of golf, you have to pay for a round of golf. If you want to do other things, buy a drink at the country club, whatever it is, you have to pay for that. The fee just gets you into the country club. Nightclubs, the cover charge, yeah, you pay the cover charge, but you still have to pay for your drinks inside. In this case, right, total revenue for that firm, can be denoted as A, where this is the first part, the membership fee, the cover charge, whatever you want to call it, that fixed fee, just to get in, times the per unit revenue. Okay. So total price per unit, therefore, is going to be, right, A over Q, right, my membership fee over how much units I have plus price. Okay. Now the example I give here is a little different because I'm assuming there are two markets and I'm trying to separate the markets off according to willingness to pay. Now, if I just had one consumer, right, what I want to do is charge a price here where demand equals marginal cost or my supply, right? And then charge a cover equal to consumer surplus. He's willing to pay A plus P times Q. Right? That would be the profit maximizing level of second degree price discrimination if I was able to figure out what this consumer's consumer surplus is, right? And I charge P times Q. Or per excuse me, the per use fee, and then a membership fee of it. That would give me the same profit, if I could do that for each consumer, that would give me the same profits as first degree price discrimination. Of course, right, I can't do that because not everybody has the same demand for my product, and people have different consumer, different surpluses. So it would be a lot harder to do for the market. Suppose I have two groups, like we had before, right? Q1 is 24 minus P1, Q2 is equal to 24 minus 2P2, right? Under perfect competition of stock, price is equal to 6, Q1 is equal to 18, Q2 is equal to 12. So consumer surplus is that upper triangle, 0.5, 12, right? Minus 6. Times 12, which is Q2, that's equal to 36. That's their consumer surplus. That would be, right, the price that I want to charge to that's the price I want to charge to group 2, right? But they're laws, so I probably have to charge the same price to both groups, right? Now, in this case, the consumer surplus of group 2, right, which has the more elastic or inelastic? So they have more elastic, so I'll get both groups here, right? Because the market segment with the smallest demand is the most price discriminating, right? The monopolist, they charge $36. I get both people. Group 1 has a consumer surplus greater than 36, right? So my profits would be my, my revenue from group one, right? My revenue from group two, that's 36, my cover charge, get in, plus 6 times 18. So from group two, 36 to get in, 6 times 12, minus my average cost, or my total cost for group one, average cost on Q1, average cost on Q2 for group two, that's 6 times 18, 6 times 12, and that gives me a profit of 72. Now, this isn't as good as my third-degree cross discrimination that I had before. Part of the reason, right, is that I can't separate them out like I did, and I got to charge that cover. And in this case, I'm charging the cover equal to the consumer surplus of the most elastic group. Okay. So instead of charging the consumer surplus for group two, right, A should equal consumer surplus for consumer two at the higher price. So my profits in this case, right, 2 times 0.5, 24 minus 2p, that's 12 minus p minus 6 times Q1, Q2. And we saw demand before, it's 48 minus 3p for everybody. So if I charge the cover charge for everyone, 2 times 0.5, 24 minus 2p, 12 minus p minus 6 times 48 minus 3p, where this is q. Right, so now I just have this in p, I do the ugly algebra, I get 18p minus p squared. I take the derivative of that with respect to p, set it equal to 0. And I get a profit, in this case, of $81, which is greater than when I charged 36, profit that is, but it's less than third degree, which was 99. It does have the aspect of fairness, because everybody gets charged the same price instead of two groups having charged different prices. But the monopolists shouldn't care about that. They should probably try to separate out the two groups and charge them different prices instead of trying to charge them a cover charge. Okay. Next, I want to talk about regulation of.
Mención típica de eso son los libros
¿Perdón?
internacionales, ¿verdad?
¿Qué?
Los libros internacionales que te venden un libro versión americana a 200 pesos y el internacional cuesta lo venden 25 por ahí en la India.
That,
Okay.
yeah. Again, they assume international students have high elasticity, drug prices.
Sí, lo mismo ocurre en Canadá. El mismo medicamento en Estados Unidos cuesta un montón y en Canadá cuesta un montón.
Exactly. Part of that is just not elasticity. Well, it's a good part of it, but it's just those countries have socialized medicine and they negotiate the price, and they get better prices than we do. But again, you have different elasticity across different groups, and they get charged different prices. Okay. Here, right, I have what's known as a natural monopoly. Right? A natural monopoly, right, is one where the relative portion of the average cost function and the marginal cost function are decreasing. Right? We usually think of average costs being U-shaped, and of course marginal costs intersecting where it hits the bottom. So what if, right, the relative portion or excuse me, the relative, not the relative, the important portion? No, it's what I'm looking for. The portion in the market where there's demand for, okay, let's go with the relevant portion. the average cost and the marginal cost of date may decline, right? That's known, oops, sorry, get up here, as a natural monopoly. And the reason being is because the more you produce, the lower your costs are going to be. And therefore, it naturally tends to monopolize. It tends to one firm who could undercut everybody else, right? Because their costs are lower. They just produce more than everybody else, they have lower costs. It's impossible for anybody to enter the market because you enter at higher costs and you just can't compete with the person that's already in the market, producing a bunch. So, natural monopolists, it's been argued that some natural monopolists are like utility companies, electricity companies. They don't have gas companies here, but utility companies, water companies, they consider those natural. Were considered natural monopolies, right? They had a cost portion, and because of that, they were regulated. Right? That's what we're going to talk about. The last one here, I have a natural monopoly who just happens to have a point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, where the price they would charge is below average cost. So in this case, this monopolist, even though it's a natural monopolist and the only one that can be in the industry, is competing at a loss simply because the costs of the relative portion, the relevant portion is the word I was looking for, and the relevant portion of demand, right, is below cost. In this case, they'd have a loss. So in other words, there wouldn't be a market here. Exactly. Okay. In this case, right, this is done with some monopolies, right? They basically allow the monopoly to charge different prices to different consumers with different elasticities, right? A form of third-degree price discrimination. So this monopoly, for those people that have inelastic demand, right? In other words, those that make a little more money, would charge the monopoly price, P1. But then people, let's say seniors that have a little less income, a little more elastic, they charge a much lower price, right here, where price equals marginal cost on the demand curve, so the poor people can get the break. And then, in this case, we have some middle income group, right, P2, right, that charges a price equal to average cost, where average cost intersects the demand curve. And of course, we have a natural monopoly, so it's downward sloping. So these people, right, in P2 are basically giving the monopolist zero economic profit. These people are giving them a monopoly profit, and these people are giving them a loss. Right? So these people subsidize these people, and these people make the monopoly break even. And when I say break even, they're still making an accounting profit, just not an economic profit. Okay. Did I go too fast? Mario? Oh, okay. Okay. So regulation. One way to regulate a company is to regulate the rate of return. Right? In other words, guarantee them a profit. The rate of return, right, on their capital, we're going to denote as S. So it's really P times Q, where this is my production function, minus WL, well, L is labor and W is the wage rate, divided by the amount of capital they've invested. Right? The total profits are going to be P times Q, minus the cost of labor minus the cost of capital. W times L minus the cost of capital times capital. Right? So I set up a Lagrangian, giving my profit function as the objective function, right? And my constraint, right, as cost minus revenue. In other words, I want to guarantee them a profit. Now, the only difference between this portion and this is that this is VK and this is SK. So this is what I want to guarantee them, and this is their cost of capital. So in general, I want S to be equal to or greater than V to ensure that they at least make a zero economic profit and don't have a loss. Okay. Now, in this case, if lambda 0, this goes away, and then we just have a straight monopolist. And that monopolist will charge the profit maximizing monopoly price. If lambda is 1, right, WL cancels with this WL, VK would cancel with, I'm sorry, no, P times FK of L would cancel with this, P times FK of L, and I'm left with minus VK plus SK, or my Lagrangian is equal to S minus V times K. Right? What that would mean is I can maximize profit by hiring an infinite amount of capital. The more capital I hire, right, the more profit I have. Of course, that's implausible, right? There's limits to how much I can hire, and of course, the regulators wouldn't go in general. So we know that lambda has to be, if they're regulated, somewhere in between 0 and 1. I take my first order conditions. First, I take my Lagrangian with respect to labor, then with respect to capital, then with respect to lambda. I set myself for lambda, and I set these two equal to each other, like we always do. So I get P times the marginal product of labor is equal to W, right? And for capital, 1 minus lambda, P times the marginal product of capital is equal to V minus lambda S. Oh, I didn't do it that. Okay. That's my second order condition. Okay. So I get P times the marginal product of capital is equal to V minus lambda S bar, 1 minus lambda, and that's equal to V minus lambda S prime minus V, 1 minus lambda. I'm sorry, I don't do it the same way that we've done this for the, I could have, right? But I'm trying to prove the point, and I want to keep lambda in the equation. And I don't know why it didn't dawn on me that I was doing that when I started talking. But I want to keep lambda in the equation because lambda is important because it has to be between 0 and 1. Right? So as long as lambda is negative, right, and S is greater than V, right, that means price times the marginal product of capital. If price is equal to marginal revenue, or if price was equal to marginal revenue, what would P times F and K be? You guys remember? Marginal revenue times marginal product is marginal revenue product. That's what you said, right? That's what I heard?
No.
Okay. So basically, my marginal revenue product for capital is going to be less than V, right? And if the market was efficient, my marginal revenue capital would be the cost of capital. In other words, I keep using capital until the revenue I get from that capital, right, is equal to the cost of it. But in this case, it's going to be less than the cost of capital, which means in a regulated monopoly that gives you a required rate of return, or a minimum rate of return, X, right? The monopoly ends up having more capital than it would otherwise. And that's considered inefficient. When I was in college, I lived in New Mexico, and public service company in New Mexico, it was a utility company, they sold natural gas and later electricity. The regulators basically guaranteed them profits, so what they did is they didn't care about containing costs. Each executive had their own jet. And of course, they had a conference room with $1 million. And remember, this was in the late 70s, early 80s. They had $1 million conference table. It was basically, they took one of those big redwoods from California and cut a slab of the redwood, and that was the conference table. But it was $1 million, so that today, probably about $10 million, for just the table. Anyway, the point is, once this happens, there's no incentive to keep costs low, right? Because the higher your cost, the higher your profit. Of course, regulators have started to catch on, but so it's kind of a game between, giving them rate increases and trying to get them to control their cost structure. Okay, questions? So we're going to continue on with my imperfect competition, but we're going to go from monopoly to oligopoly. And if you go to my MBA class, this will be lecture 11. So oligopoly is the assumptions are virtually the same as a monopoly, except for instead of having a single firm, you just have a few firms. Other than that, all our assumptions are the same for an oligopoly as a monopoly. Right? There's a few sellers, homogeneous or unique products. There's blockaded entry and exit and imperfect dissemination of information. But we have more than one firm, right? So price is a function of what these firms produce. Okay? So the profit for each individual firm in the oligopoly, right, is P times QI minus their total costs, or I. But P, as we said, is going to be a function of all the quantities of all the oligopolies that they produce. Right, times QI, QI. So it doesn't matter what it doesn't matter just what I produce. What I produce is important, but it's also important what everybody else produces. Because if everybody overproduces in the oligopoly, right, price is going to come down. And we might get a price even below the perfect competitive price, which would be bad because that means economic profits would be negative. Okay. We're going to start with the cartel model. Cartel just means they get together and decide to restrict quantity. In other words, they get together and act as a monopoly, right? And then they set the monopoly quantity, and price, and then they just split the market between them, right? If they're equally sized firms, so they try to split the quantity between them and therefore the profit between them.
Cada quien está incentivado a hacer trampa.
¿Perdón?
Pero cada quien está incentivado a hacer trampa.
Yes. Okay. So, right, we have our monopoly, our cartel that's acting as a monopoly, P times Q minus the summation of all the marginal costs, all the total costs. I take the profit for any one firm, so P, right, times Q, but P is also a function of all the little q's, so F of QA, the partial Q with respect to QI. Everybody understands this part? In other words, I have P, a function of all the little q's, and then I have Q, so I do it with respect to QI, and I just get P. And then all the little q's, the partial P with respect to QI minus marginal cost. And I set that to 0, and of course that gives me marginal revenue equals marginal cost, just like any other monopoly. Now, the question is, how viable is a cartel? Well, in almost every developed country, collusion is illegal. Right? If they get together and try to fix the price, it's illegal. Of course, information on demand and cost of each firm is hard to come by. You can think of OPEC, for instance, where these aren't firms, these are countries, but each firm, or each country in this case, sorry, has an incentive to cheat, like we said, we call it cheating or chiseling. And it's hard to figure out what the demand and the cost of their product is of that oil being pumped out of the ground. And finally, cheating. OPEC was the perfect example in the 70s and especially in the 80s. In the 70s, they were able to raise price quite a bit short term. But by the 80s, there was so much cheating in OPEC that a barrel of oil went down to $10 per barrel. So, most economic models for an oligopoly do simulated duopoly. All that means is there's an oligopoly with two firms. Cournot is a French economist from the 17th century, I think. I can't remember now, but basically an old French economist that came up with the model. Right? In this case, the firm recognizes that their own quantity or changes in their own quantity affects price, but doesn't realize that when he changes quantity, it not only affects price, but it affects the behavior of the other firm in the market. Right? So I know that my price affects quantity. In other words, it's not equal to 0. I'm sorry, my quantity affects price, not equal to 0. But I assume that when I change quantity, it doesn't affect the quantity of the other person. So I change quantity, it doesn't affect the quantity of J. Their quantity stays the same. So I can do a profit function. It's P plus QI, the partial of P with respect to QI, that equals 0 minus PC QI. I set that equal to 0. So in this case, right, output will be less than perfect competition. But since this part, Q times the partial of P with respect to QI, right, is going to be negative because we have a downward sloping demand curve, right? Output is greater than under monopoly or the cartel solution. So I have a quantity that's not the monopoly quantity, it's not the perfect competition quantity, but it's somewhere in between. Okay. We'll get back to the Cournot solution a little later. Next, we're going to talk about two forms of price leadership. The first one is just general price leadership. This is where one firm sets a price and the other just acts as a price taker and follows. Right? I'm going to assume, like Cournot did, that we have a natural spring and the cost of taking the water out and selling it is 0. So my demand, the total market demand, is demand for water from firm 1 plus water for firm 2, and that equals 120 minus P. So the inverse demand curve, right, is 120 minus Q, and therefore profits, that's monopoly, total revenue minus total cost is 120 Q minus Q squared. So our cartel solution under this, it's not quite price leadership, because I want something to compare it to. So my cartel solution in this case is the active monopoly before price leadership, right? I take profit, I take the derivative with respect to Q, I get marginal revenue to marginal cost, or 120 minus 2Q is equal to 0. Solve for Q, I get a Q of 60. I plug that Q back into my inverse demand function, I get a price of also 60. and my profit is 3,600. I'm assuming the firms are equal size, so we split it right down the middle, and each firm gets 1,800 each, acting like a monopoly. Okay. So that's price leadership. I'm sorry, that's collusion. Back to cartel with the same assumptions. I'm sorry, Carnot with the same assumptions. Where each firm thinks that what they do doesn't affect the other firm, or the other firm doesn't react to what they do. So my inverse demand curve, 120 minus Q1 minus Q2. No cost, so my profit is just total revenue. So 120 Q1 minus Q2 times Q1, because this is the total, this is the profit of firm one. So I get 120 Q1 minus Q1 squared minus Q1 Q2. And the same thing for firm two, 120 Q2 minus Q1 Q2 minus Q2 squared. Okay. But each firm believes that their actions go unheeded by the other firm. It doesn't react to yours. I take profits and I take the partial with respect to the firm one to Q1, firm two to Q2, and I get the following. Okay. For Q1, is equal to 0, I get 2 Q1 is equal to 120 minus Q2, or Q1 is equal to 120 minus Q2 over 2, or 60 minus 1/2 Q2. This, right, is known as firm one's reaction function. I do the same thing for Q2, and I get the same thing, just switch around the ones and the twos, because they're symmetric. And I get the reaction function for Q2. Right? So these are called reaction functions, right? In this case, Q1 is equal to Q2, so I can just plug that in. So I just plug in for Q1, so I get 120 minus Q2, or 120 minus 3Q2, set that equal to 0. They give me 120 is equal to 3Q2, or Q2 is equal to 40. I do the same thing for Q1, I can plug it into the reaction function 40. Right? 1/2 of 40 is 20, so Q1 would be 40. So Q1 is equal to Q2 is equal to 40. I plug that back into my inverse demand function for the whole market, and I get a price of 40. Be careful here. So that means that profit for the entire industry would be 3,200, right? I divide that in half, and I get 1,600. Be careful, especially my MBA students, but I haven't talked with students do this, right? They take, for instance, the cartel solution or this, and they take the quantity and they divide that by 2, which is fine, which is what you're supposed to do. But then they do the same thing for price. You must, if you divide price by 2, you're cutting price in half. They're not dividing the price in between them, they're dividing the quantity in between them and charging, right, the profit maximizing price if they're a cartel, right? Or here, right, they're charging the profit maximizing price given what the other person's doing. This is a Carnot solution. So don't ever cut price in half. It's only quantity and profit that get cut in half. Okay. So back to my price leadership example, right? One firm sets price, the other acts as a price taker. So this first one, right, charges The bound Q1 is equal to, sorry, Q is equal to marginal revenue equals marginal cost, starting the price of P1. And the second firm just takes the price as given and charges that. So, suppose, right, this is my reaction function for firm 2. Right? If I take the derivative of my reaction function with respect to Q1, right, I get negative 1/2. Right? The 120 over 2 is 60, that doesn't have Q1, so I go away. So I get 1/2 Q1. So the partial is just negative 1/2. Right? My profit for firm 1 is just the revenue, so it's 120 Q1 minus Q1 squared minus Q1 Q2. And I take the derivative, so I get 120 minus 2Q1 minus Q1, the partial of Q2 with respect to Q1, minus Q2. Right? Now here, I can plug in negative 1/2. By the way, does everybody see what I've done here? It's the same thing, right? Q2 is a function of Q1, and of course Q1 is a function of Q1. So I have to apply the chain rule, and I get two terms here. So first I take the partial Q1 times partial Q2 over Q1 minus the partial Q1 over Q1 times Q2. That's what I get. This I know is negative 1/2. I can plug in negative 1/2 here. Right? So I get 120 minus 3/2 Q1 minus Q2. Was that a question? Okay. So now I have a function with Q1 and Q2. I can go ahead and plug in my reaction function for Q2. So I plug in for Q2, 120 minus Q1 divided by 2. So I get a function with just Q1 in it, no Q2. So I have 120 minus 3/2 Q1 minus 60 minus Q1 over 2, or 1/2 Q1. I solve for Q1, and I get Q1 is equal to 60. I take that 60 from Q1's, from Q2's reaction, I plug it into Q2's reaction. So I get Q2 is equal to 60 minus 1/2 Q1, which is 60, we just had, and that gives me 30. So in this case, with Q1 being the price leader, right, he's going to produce 60 units, and Q2, the follower, wants to maximize profits, right, and will produce 30 units. The price, right, since the total quantity is 90, is going to be 30. And we take that from our inverse demand curve of 100 minus Q1 minus Q2. I'm sorry, 120 minus Q1 minus Q2. So profit for firm 1 is 1,800, and profit for firm 2 is 900. So you see there's an incentive to be the leader to get higher profits. But it doesn't say who's going to be the leader. If you have two equally sized firms that both try to be the leader, right? Both will produce basically a perfectly competitive outcome, but that would mean they end up with a price below PC and negative economic profit. Right? If both are followers, then we end up with the Cournot solution that we had in the previous example. Okay, questions? Okay. That's our talk on oligopoly. Like I said, if you want a more basic lecture, you can go to my slides in my MBA class, and that's a little less math and a little more conceptual. Okay. Product differentiation. Okay. So tonight we've had monopoly, oligopoly. Now we're going to go into something known as monopolistic competition. Oligopoly is very similar to monopoly, except for there's a few firms instead of one firm. Monopolistic competition is a lot like perfect competition, except there's product differentiation. Not everybody sells the same exact thing, like under perfect competition. So product differentiation is how the product is perceived. If I can differentiate my product, that means we have a heterogeneous product. A product group, however, is an output or set of firms that constitute a production group, a product group, if substitutability in demand among the products, right, price elasticity, is very high relative to groups. For instance, even though it's basically, I wouldn't say it's become an oligopoly, but there's two big soft drink producers in the United States, Pepsi and Coke. There's a bunch of small ones, but they're mostly local and they don't compete nationwide with Pepsi and Coke. But as far as nationwide, there's two. Most people don't really see a difference between the two, but there are people that really like Coke or really like Pepsi. But for most of us, it's a perfect substitute. I don't care if I'm drinking Pepsi or drinking Coke. Okay. So what that means is, for a firm, right, I have two decisions now. How much do I produce? And how much do I spend on trying to differentiate my product? So my total cost, right, is going to be a function of how much I produce and how much I spend on, let's say, advertising. Right? So the price of I, right, is going to depend on, or is going to be a function of how much I produce, right? How much I spend on differentiation. How much the price of my competitors are in the same product group, and how much they spend on differentiation, trying to convince consumers that their stuff's better than mine. So therefore, profits is going to be PI/QI minus total cost, which is a function of ZI and QI. Okay. So I go ahead and I take the derivative of the partial of profits, first with respect to quantity, and then with respect to quality. I'm sorry, to the amount I spend on differentiation, quality or retail. And that was under monopoly. So. Okay, so this looks a lot like what we did before, except now, of course, I'm assuming that price is a function of quantity, so I get this second term here. And with product differentiation, right, how the price is affected by the money I spend on differentiation, QI, minus total costs, or the partial total costs, with respect to how much I spend on differentiation GI. So that equals 0. So in this case, the price not only depends on what I spend, but it also depends on the quantity that my competitors produce and what they spend on differentiation. So it becomes complicated, right? We can have other types of differentiation. Spatial differentiation is basically where I'm going to put my store. If I can put my store somewhere that gives me a competitive edge over my competition, they'll come to me more often than they'll go to my competitors. Okay. So that brings me to monopolistic competition. Okay. The assumptions, as I said, are basically the same as perfect competition, except now we have a heterogeneous product. Instead of a homogeneous product. Right? We have a large numbers of buyers and sellers. Okay. There's free entry and exit, just like perfect competition, and there's perfect dissemination of information. I know pretty much everything about all my potential competitors, and if I'm a buyer, I'm sorry, if I drink Coke, I can find out anything about Coke or Pepsi. I just go to Edgar and I look at their SEC filings or whatever. Of course, I never know what's in, nobody knows what's in Coke because they keep it secret. But, I mean, there's other Cokes that if you put a blindfold on and you tasted them, you probably couldn't, most of us couldn't tell the difference. There's some people who really love Coke and they might be able to tell the difference. They used to tell me that about beer, but I could tell the difference when I was younger between different beers, blindfolded or not. Okay. So, for Coke, we can think of Coca-Cola as having a monopoly on Coke. It's obvious, it has competition, but for Coke, it has a monopoly. So we can think of it as facing a downward sloping demand curve. So therefore, it's going to price, at least technically, the same as a monopoly does. It faces a downward sloping demand curve, it profit maximizes where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Right? And when marginal revenue equals marginal cost, it lets the demand curve determine price. Okay. But, like perfect competition, if there's a product group out there, right? If there's a product group out there where they're making profits, right? Like perfect competition, they're going to have entry into this product group. Remember, there's easy entry and exit. So what's going to happen is you're going to have more product groups come in, right? And the demand curve this is hard to draw because I have to do it perfectly. I'll go ahead and, I think I have a black marker.
Jimmy.
So I'll call that D1. Okay. I did that measure. Let me do it higher. Sorry, guys. I just call it, and I'm just going to call this P then. Let's call that Q. And the Q1, MR1, okay, and Q2. Now notice when when we had more competition, they saw I made profit, my demand curve shifts in, and it shifts in up into the point where there's no more incentive, just like in the first competition, no more incentive for more firms to enter, and therefore shifting my demand curve more to the left. Up into the point where I'm making zero profit. Okay. So, let's assume, right, that I have a bunch of firms, and they all have the same total cost on it. Right, the costs are equal to 9 minus 4 QI, whatever they're producing. And they all have the same demand curve, which is a function of not only what they produce, but what other firms produce and charge. So QI is equal to 0.01 n minus 1 PI plus 0.01, the summation from 1 to n minus 1 PJ plus 303 over n, where n is the number of firms in the product group. Right? So all these PJs are different prices for different competitors in my product group. Right? If PI equals PJ, then the summation of PJ is simply PJ n minus 1, assuming all the PJs are equal. Right? And of course, if that's true, this, which has a negative sign, plus this, they cancel out, and I'm left with QI equals to 303 over n. But that's not interesting. I want to know what happens as we compete, not as we have the same price, right? So plugging in, right, QI and CI into my profit function, right? So that's P times QI, and this is QI. CI, which is 9 plus 4 QI. Of course, I have a QI here that I want to get rid of, so I'll plug in my demand function in there, 2. Taking the derivative with respect to PI, and did I skip a slide? Yeah, I did. Okay, so I plug QI in here. Did I hit it too fast? I didn't even notice what happened. Okay. Anyway, I have this minus this, and this QI. I take the derivative of my profit with respect to PI, right? And I get the following: 0.01 n minus 1 to PI plus 0.01 summation PJ plus 303 n minus 4 negative 0.01 n minus 1 is equal to 0. Basically, I'm just taking the profit function with respect to PI. Now, I'd like to set PI equal to PJ. Once I have that profit maximizing point, I can assume that everybody's going to charge the same price. So now I have 0.01 n minus 1 to P1 plus 0.01 n minus 1 PI. So I have a little different now, they just don't cancel. Of course, plus 303 over n minus 4 minus 0.01 n minus 1. So solving for PI, right? 0.02 n minus 1 PI minus, 0.02 n minus 1 PI minus 0.01 n minus 1 PI equals 303 over n minus 4 negative 0.01 n times 1. So I have the PI over there. So that's 0.01 n minus 1. PI is equal to this stuff at the end. I divide both sides by 0.01 n minus 1. So I get PI is equal to 303 over n minus 4 minus 1 minus 0.01 n minus 1 over 0.01 n minus 1. Right? Doing the math, I get PI is equal to 30,300 over n times n minus 1 plus 4. Okay. Since my profit function, PQI minus C is equal to 0 for when I place a competitive firm in the long run, like we showed over there in the graph, right? I'll go ahead and set it equal to 0. And the competitive firm, which means I can plug in the results for PI and QI. Then we just got when PI is equal to PJ. So setting that equal to 0, I plug my equation for PI up there 303n minus my cost function, 9 minus 4, 303 over n, and I get the following. N is equal to 101. How do I do this? I did this with MATLAB. I try to do it by hand, and it can't be done by hand. You need a programmable calculator or computer program. So obviously I'm going to get on a test. PI QI equals 3, and of course profit by assumption was equal to 0, so 0. Okay. And this is what I try to do, just letting you know what I try to do and why I couldn't get it to work. So I put it in software. Okay. So next I'm going to talk about contestable markets versus monopoly. Right? Suppose entry and exits are free, just like we assumed under monopolistic competition, and or outside potential entrant can enter by cutting prices and still make a profit. Right? If such profit opportunities exist, then potential entrants will take advantage of them. So let's start off with a baseline with a monopoly where there is no entry. I'm going to assume total cost is equal to 100Q plus 8,000. My demand is equal to 1,000 minus 5P, and therefore my inverse demand is equal to 200 minus 0.2Q. So I multiply this by Q to get total revenue, take the derivative to get marginal revenue, which is 200 minus 0.4Q. Over here, right, my total cost function, I take the derivative of that with respect to Q, and I get 100. So 200 minus 0.4Q, I take this, I have a negative 0.4Q, I take the 200 over here, I get negative 4Q is equal to negative 100. I divide both sides by negative 4Q, I'm sorry, by 0.4, I divide both sides by 0.4, I get 100 over 0.4, or a quantity of 250, the monopoly quantity. I plug that back into my inverse demand function, and I get a price of 150. Okay. So that's with the monopoly. What about if I have a contestable solution and somebody can enter the market? So here, price, right, has to equal average cost to keep people out, because if they see that I'm making an economic profit, they'll enter the market. So in this case, I set, right, my quantity to 500 minus 5P. I set P equal to average cost, so I get 1,000 minus 5 AC, and my average cost is just dividing total cost by Q quantity. So 1,000 minus 5 times 100 plus 8,000 over Q, right? It's my average cost. That equals 1,000 minus 500, or 500 minus 40,000 Q. Basically, we have a quadratic equation now. I rewrite it as such: Q squared equals 500 plus 40,000, and that gives me a quantity of 400 and a price of 120. Oops. So if I compare that to the monopoly, right, I have a lower price and more quantity, but hopefully that keeps people out from competing. Okay.
Pregunta, en esa cuadrática,
Uh-huh.
¿cómo uno elige 400? Porque está 400 está 100. ¿Cómo uno elige 400? ¿Cómo saca los valores de ti?
Oh, you're gonna make me do the quadratic formula?
No, sale 400 y sale 100.
El precio sale 100.
los dos valores de curso. Uno es 400, el otro es 100, como uno elige 400.
Oh, are you sure it's 100, not a negative 100?
No, es que los dos van a
Cuando
ser
uno
positivos.
hace la
Sí,
Entonces
la
era
factorización
positivo.
es Q menos 400 y Q menos 100, que entonces sería 400 y 100.
Okay.
Pero no nos compliquemos por detalle.
No. It's a legitimate question. And now I have to think about it.
María, te retiro mi voto, no te voy a decir organización.
Pues si fuera negativo entiendo por
Sí,
qué,
no,
pero si es positivo también, el mayor, no sé si eso tiene algún sentido.
O sea, que tiene una lógica y te gusta todo.
Más mejor olvídate.
Yo sé que piensen que saben si por lo cierto.
Cuando uno factoriza Q cuadrado menos 500Q más 40.000.
400%, 40.000. 400 más 100 suma 500. Los dos sería Q menos 400 y Q menos 100. Por lo tanto, los dos salen positivos.
Los dos salen positivos.
Okay. Well, let's do it then.
María, no te cuidas.
Entonces, ¿qué va a ser el precio cuando la cantidad es 100? 80, ¿no? All right.
100 por punto 2, 20.
Oh,
Es 20, 180.
okay. Okay. ¿Correcto? Gabriel Catherine. And they both give me a profit of 0. And
Tienes una estrellita, ¿ok?
okay. No. And
¿Dónde?
I'm sorry. Well,
De oro.
okay. So let's do it graphically. Mhm. 100. 100. This is why it's here for. No? Let's think about this. The demand curve crosses the average cost curve in two places, which is why we have a quadratic. One is at a quantity of 400 and a price of 100. The other is with the price of 180 and a thing of 100, right? And they both give me a profit of 0, but the only reason I have a profit of 0 is to keep people out, right? Up here, basically, there's no reason to be up here because as I produce more, right? My costs come down. So if I'm up here, right, just a little lower price would give me higher profits. Up here, I can make the same argument, a little higher price gives me more profits, but I want to keep people out. If I'm up here at a price of 180, what are other firms going to do? They don't mind the price of 180. Just because I'm making 0 profits, they're happy to come in and charge the price of 180 and they'll make a profit. Over here is where they won't be able to make a profit. And that's why we pick 400 over 100. But thank you, that's a good point. Okay, more questions?
No.
No, really. That was a really good question. It really was. All right. So Wednesday, we come today, we'll have the test.
¿Puedes enviar otro examen adicional?
¿Perdona?
Si puedes enviar otro examen adicional, mejor todavía.
Another practice exam?
Sí.
I run out of questions if I gave you more practice exams.
No sé que no tiene como contestaciones, ¿no? La dos.
Ah, sí, nada.
Se me da como que no tiene.
Era tú, ¿no? Okay. Okay. So, I know two, you and you, both. She wrote first, so I answered her and told her to write everybody else. Okay. Any questions on practice exam, anything? All right. I'm not gonna be here next week. My assistant will give me the test, which is part of the reason I wanted the test. The other part is I didn't want to give you the test right before Thanksgiving. Perdona? That's for game theory, right? No. That comes on final. All right. Enjoy your 3-day weekend, guys. Have fun. Oh, yes. By the way, I told you guys you could do that for the first exam, right?
¿Qué cosa?
Huh?
¿Qué cosa?
Hoja de fórmula.
I asked my assistant and he never told me. And I apologize. I should have. I do this for all my classes. I don't want you guys memorizing formulas. You get a 3 by 5 card.
¿Sabes cuál es la próxima tarea, verdad? Optimizar el margen.
You get, I apologize. You get a 3 by 5 card that you can use on the test, and you can write anything you want on it, front and back.
Very enough.
De 3 a 5.
No, nada, esto.
Tell you what, 4 by 6, is that better?
Sí, porque este está
Ese es 3 por 5.
4 por 6, 4 por 6.
¿Cuántas?
Todo lo pequeño. Trata de escribir pequeño.
One that you can write front and back.
Okay.
4 by 6 or you want 3 by 5? 3 by 5 or you can find.
8 por 11, 8 por 11. Y 9 por 11.
3 by 5 or 4 by 6?
4 by 6.
Okay, 4 by 6, you get a 4 by 6, and you can write anything you want on it, front and back.
Okay.
And I apologize, I could have sworn I told you guys. I was getting it. Amén.